you still behaving like an A student? Do you find yourself overthinking and over-preparing in order to get the proverbial gold star or other external validation? This week, I talk with Lauree Ostrofsky, who describes herself as chief hugger and coach. Lauree helps introverts, A students, and overthinkers to more confidently take their next leap. Here we talk about the ways in which overthinking gives us the illusion of emotional safety, but actually keeps us from becoming our best selves. Lauree and I explore how deciding for ourselves what's good enough can help us manage perfectionism and begin to loosen the unrealistic standards we hold ourselves to so that we can do more of what is meaningful to us. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. And don't forget, if you're looking for extra support with imposter syndrome, visit kimmeninger.com/challenge to sign up for the Impostor Syndrome Challenge, 7 days to greater confidence. Thank you. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Lauree. It is so wonderful to meet you, and I'm excited to have you here today. I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Oh, Kim, thanks so much for letting me be part of this conversation. I am an A student from way back, an overthinker, and probably imposter syndrome works really well into that. There's lots of ways that you can define it. But I normally say I'm an A student and an overthinker. And what that means to me is that third grade felt really comfortable. Third grade, when the instructions were listed on construction paper on the wall, and I knew exactly what was required in order to get an A or a gold star. And I tend to work with them in my coaching practice as well, because adult life, unfortunately, doesn't have instructions as clearly written out as it did in third grade. And so knowing my own proclivities as an A student and overthinker, I tend to work with mainly women, but all folks who are A students and overthinkers looking to leap in their career and do more meaningful work. Most of us can keep, especially if you're successful, you can keep doing what you're doing for a while and keep getting accolades and keep getting promoted. But at some point we reach in our careers, like I did, there's got to be more than this. There's got to be something more meaningful or aligned with who I am and what I do best. And that to me is the challenge of A students. Oh my gosh, there's potential disappointment or disappointing someone else if we try something new. So that's the leaping that I tend to do with my clients.
I love that so much, because that is a big way that I think about the challenge that so many of us face, is that we're still behaving as good students, right? And we're still longing for the days when we had that clear structure and clear direction. But what you're making me think about too is that when you said there's got to be something more, or you can do things with more meaning, being a student means doing what other people tell us to do, right? Because when you're a student, you don't decide what you learn. You don't decide what you get tested on. You don't decide your assignments. You dutifully fulfill somebody else's responsibilities, right? Like, or what they're telling you to do. And so you give up a certain amount of control and certainly creative freedom in doing that.
Right, absolutely. And we give up that freedom even as parents and coworkers and staff members and quote unquote good friends, the ones that you can count on. We give up that control for safety. or for what seems like safety. Okay, if I know that this person needs something, if I know that I'm needed, then I feel a little bit safer about what my day is going to look like. If no one is telling me what to do, how possibly do I fill my schedule? I probably should go and find people to tell me what to do, you know. And I work with some folks who have moved from corporate into entrepreneurship, and as a business owner, one of the things I've had to find is, how do I create a schedule where freedom, which is a value of mine, also goes with getting things done? How do those two things, and how do I define my own gold stars beyond likes on social media, and other people praising me, which is, kind of the A student way.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is a great example of that. I also work with a number of, rising leaders who are stepping into more strategic leadership positions. And it's really hard for them to make that transition because they often feel like they're not meeting their own expectations. And a lot of that, what I'll say to them is, you need new metrics, right? Because the way you were defining your success and your performance in the past was all very almost like execution oriented. It was about getting things done. What have I crossed off my list? And then as you rise to higher levels of leadership, when you have more autonomy over your work, you can't measure yourself
Yeah.
in terms of, like you don't get those check marks for the assignments that you turned in, right?
Right. And your success at those levels is really based around being able to hand off your work and delegate, and manage. And that's how micromanagement can sometimes happen, or sometimes we hold on to, whatever your career is, sometimes we hold on to more of the work because of those check marks off your to-do list is still our defining principles. How do we delegate in a way where we still feel successful when those projects happen and we haven't been part of them?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up micromanagement because I do think that's a big part of imposter syndrome and the conversation that we're having. And I mean, we sort of all know how we feel when we're on the other end of a micromanager, but I really think it is incumbent upon all of us to develop the self-awareness to recognize where we may be playing that role on our
Yeah.
teams. And I've talked to so many people who have very honestly revealed, I have trouble giving up control. It's really hard for me. And it's not just about you anymore, right?
Yeah. Well, control is such a big one. And in the A student work, the overthinking, it's so much of that I mentioned before about safety. And safety isn't necessarily a word that maybe comes to mind around this. Like safety, I usually think of more physical safety, but really it's an emotional safety piece. It's like, and control can give us emotion, can give us the sense of emotional safety. When in the past, in our childhoods, and we have received emotional safety, or we've looked externally for emotional safety and haven't quite learned to give ourselves that emotional safety. Like, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay.
Mhm.
That's one of the things we're supposed to learn as kids. And if we didn't, for whatever reason, as adults, it's hard to believe ourselves when we tell ourselves we're going to be okay. We're looking for some kind of external confirmation that we're going to be okay. And if we don't have it, and we're not giving it to ourselves, the control piece is a way that we can try to get it. If I control every part of this project, if I know when this deadline is and I know I've checked off my to-do list, or then everything's going to be okay. Or I'm if my annual reviews are okay. And how we redefine our to-do lists are really about how we give ourselves emotional safety in other ways, because our to-do lists are emotional safety as much as everything else it is.
Yeah, it's such a good way of framing it. And as you're talking about that, I think like we get so comfortable with the gold stars, with the grades, with you just have this, you don't have to go very long when you're in school without knowing exactly where you stand, right? Because you're going to get a grade on the assignment you turned in within a couple of days. You're going to get your report card. You kind of always know how things are going. but not everybody has managers that are skilled at giving feedback. Not everybody has even like performance management systems that offer repeatable or productive feedback. And so what you're talking about is really breaking out of that need for external validation, right? Like, how do I get to a point where if I don't have the gold stars and I don't get the grades, like, how do I trust myself? How do I trust that I am performing at a level that meets my expectations?
Right. How am I satisfied with my own work before anyone else says otherwise?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That is a big one. That is taking the time personally and likely alone, and maybe with a journal or maybe a meditation or a walk to really define what success is to us and what's going to be good enough. As a student, we were talking before this podcast started about starting a podcast, like just, doing it good enough. And like, how do we cut ourselves off from like falling into second guessing and overthinking and perfection. And it's like, oh, it's actually us defining good enough. So it's defining the boundaries of like, what is success and also what is good enough? Like, what's the range in there that I know I'm doing okay?
Yes, yes. And I love that whole concept of what is good enough, because I think when we talk about perfectionism, right? Perfectionism, A, is not realistic, and B, is exhausting. And
Yeah.
there are so many ways in which I don't want to use the word, I don't want to sound judgy, but I would put myself in this category of having wasted so much time, right? There's so many things that, we spend time on. And I often joke, like, is the email you reread 10 times really that much better than it was when you've read it the third or fourth time, right? And
Yeah.
it just feels like there are so many other ways that we could be channeling our skills and our energy, but we get trapped in
Yeah.
these moments where we're overthinking, like you had said at the beginning, overthinking something that no one else is even going to notice. It's not consequential to the outcome at all. And so, it's really about being able to set those, to calibrate a little bit better around, like, there are times when my best effort is required. And there are other times when, just showing up is good enough, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've talked to clients about 80%. Like your 80% is most people's 110%. And as an A student, 80% is failure for me. It's like, why did I even try? Like, oh my God, if I'm not getting an A, if not, I'm not getting a 95 or 100 or bonus points, why am I even doing this? And so that's also like, all right, if the grading is helps, I talk with my clients about like, what's 80%? Like, what could you define as 80% of this meeting? Of like, how do you show up at 80% at this meeting or in this email that you're writing or on this project? What does 80% look like? It might mean going home on time or shutting off your computer at a certain time or um, uh, not checking the third time after you've written something and just saying, you know what, if there's a period missing, this would totally trip me up. If there's a period missing, it's okay. They're still going to be able to read it. And I wanted to say also about the term perfectionism is that I have never called myself a perfectionist. I shrink at that term. And I think that there's a bunch of us. Okay, but technically probably I'm probably am a perfectionist. As if I'm saying a student and overthinker, I am. But because I've never deemed anything I've done in my life as perfect, I'm like, well, clearly I'm not a perfectionist because I have friends that are that version of perfect, like really do it well. And I'm like, my good enough is still an A, but like And that's kind of why I defined, like I created this overthinking quiz. I guess I wanted to say it now because I feel like I think this perfectionism thing or how we define that goes into why I developed this overthinking quiz because overthinkers or A students are like what I would consider the Hermione Grangers from like Harry Potter. Like she's like, no joke, all I's dotted, all T's crossed. And she's like, yeah, hand up. And if you are not that person, you can go around defining yourself as like, well, I'm not really an A student because I'm not her. I'm not as good as her. And what I realize is that my version of an A student is working the system to know exactly what's required to get an A in any situation, like gaming the system, like figuring out, hearing what, because I'm an oversensitive person, I'm like super sensitive to like what people are saying and the feeling in a room. I have been able to be hyper aware about what teachers need or employees need or my clients need to do just that.
Mm.
And that's a bit of a perfectionist, but it's a different version of that. That's definitely an overthinker because I'm hyper vigilant and analyzing, but it's not the Hermione version.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of define like, you're still this, but it looks a little different to try to help ourselves like define how this stuff, how this overthinking, perfectionism, A student, imposter syndrome, how that shows up and how do we work within it.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a great distinction. And just as you're talking, I'm thinking about like how much of the way that you're approaching it, and it resonates so much with me as somebody who's always been like a room reader, right? Like I'm always aware of everybody's facial expression and everybody's emotions at any given time. Is like how much you're oriented towards pleasing other people, right? And how much of it is about what other people want as opposed to
Yeah.
what you want. And so I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit of your personal story of how you got here. Like this has been your own personal journey, and now you've obviously made this decision to help other people on it. So what were some of the moments that got you here?
Yeah. Well, so I was an A student from way back. So what I like to talk about are, there were a couple defining moments for me. One was at 28 when I was on the track in the corporate world, had my 401k. I always say my mom liked my boyfriend. I was working in Manhattan and I had my cute business suits and I thought I was doing everything that you were supposed to. I was eating my vegetables and I had this feeling that this wasn't the job I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't fulfilled there, but I was good at it. I got good reviews. Um, and and then I had an ear infection that wouldn't go away. And so I dutifully went to the doctor because that's what you got all my tests and I was ready because I'd never had a negative experience in a doctor's office because I, brush my teeth regularly and floss. And there I sat in the doctor's office and the doctor came in and said, you have a brain tumor. And I spent actually a month just having the biggest pity party in the world of I did everything right.
Hmm.
I did all the things. I checked everything off the list. I did everything I thought I could control to make my life okay. And the path I thought I was on took a turn. And I think so many of us, if we've lived long enough, we've had moments in some way of when we think we have control over everything and we think we have defined the path for ourselves. And something comes in to shift us. And it's what do we do when that shift happens? And or that barrier comes up, or we don't get the promotion we want, or the person we love doesn't love us back. And so in that moment and in the preceding, like, or in the next while when I was in hospitals and I had ended up having 3 operations to remove this brain tumor. And luckily I'm great now, which is awesome. But it was kind
My
of
next question.
starting.
How are you?
Yes, I'm okay now. But I started to finally understand what we have control over and what we think we have control over.
Mhm.
And I think folks, I mean, everybody who's gone through the pandemic has now learned this as well, which is we went about our lives thinking we had control over a lot of things. And then the pandemic happened. And we're like, oh, our lives got a lot smaller. What is important and what we had control over just shrunk noticeably. And that's really what I learned. So what I learned is what we have control over is what we think about something, how we feel about it, how we talk about it. The words that we use are really, really powerful. The people we surround ourselves with, and ultimately the choices we make out of the situation. Because there are things that happen, especially in adulthood, that happen beyond our control. But these are the things that we really have control over. We think it's the email, if we get the message right, or if we get the design right, or that things will be okay. But it's really like, how are we talking to ourselves as we're working on this project? How are we feeling about our contribution in our personal professional lives? Like, that's what matters. And it kind of goes back to creating our own sense of success and good enough. So having that realization in my life really propelled me towards, the things I thought were scary, like disappointing people. And my parents will be so bummed if I leave this 401k and I go and, start my own business or something, or spend my savings to travel. Didn't seem as scary because I had experienced something really scary. And that propelled me as an introvert and a shy person into becoming a speaker. And I had never done, I'd never thought to speak in front of people before. And when I was thinking about kind of this podcast and having a conversation with you, I was thinking about my first speech. And my first speech was, I realized that having had this brain tumor and recognizing what life is really about and what my career really could be, which is helping people recognize what they do have control over, as opposed to all the things we desperately try to hold on to. That if I spoke in front of people, I could reach more people at once. Like, there is a real opportunity there. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll speak. I guess I'll do a speech. And so I submitted to this contest in Washington, D.C., where I was living at the time, and won and was able to give a 5-minute talk. And I was so nervous. So the thing I want to say, I was so nervous that day that for 4 hours before I showed up, I practiced my 5-minute speech for 4 hours. I practiced the speech in the heels I was going to wear that night, because I was like, okay, I was in my pajamas in my in my apartment, in my heels, like, okay, all right. And I'm practicing it. And I was practicing all the pauses and thinking, oh, people might laugh at that part, so I should pause. I should pause here for effect. I had everything practiced because I knew, and I'm sure some of your listeners know as well, I'm going to freak out. I am totally going to freak out when I look at people and I realize they're looking at me. So I'm going to have to know this cold in order to, no matter what, I'm still talking while I'm freaking out. And basically that's what happened, because I showed up and there were 450 people there. And I was like, okay, not prepared. And so the other thing that I did is that I walked into the restroom because I really thought I was going to throw up, but I'm hiding in the stall, pacing, in the stall. And I figure, okay, either I'm going to throw up and I'm in the right place for it, or I'm going to practice my speech and not look at anybody until I have to look at them. And that is now my go-to strategy for handling scary things, which is go hide in the bathroom. And and two, practice as long as I need to in order to know that I'm going to be okay, that I'm going to allow my feelings to be whatever they are. I'm not going to judge myself for freaking out in front of people. Um, and but I'm going to be prepared enough so that way I feel safe. I feel supported by the prep that I've done. I don't have to prepare for 4 hours now, but it's still, I recognize that I'm the emotions that I'm going to have, and I support myself around those. And so I guess the last thing, I'm like going on and on, but the last thing I want to say is the other moment that helped me recognize the path I'm on, and is when I got out of the bathroom and I got on stage. So there was a moment when I was speaking, and I didn't know that this was going to be the most powerful piece of my speech, but I said to the crowd, I'm on stage tonight because I'm scared and doing it anyway. Mm. And everyone roared back, like clapped. And people came up to me the rest of the night and they said, I'm scared and doing it anyway, too. I'm scared and doing it anyway, too. And I realized that like there's something really powerful when we own our own vulnerabilities. We leave space for others to own theirs too. And I think that's really what the idea, to me, the sense of your podcast and what you're talking about, imposter syndrome, like we feel better when we have safe spaces and other people who are willing to admit, yeah, I feel it too. And I'm scared and doing it anyway has now become a mantra for me. It's the title of my first book. It's very much what I talk to my clients about is how we treat ourselves in the scary moments. The doing it anyway doesn't have to be a mean teacher judging us that we better get it right or else we're going to fail. It can be a really kind person that says, if you want to hide in the bathroom until you go on stage, because that makes you feel a little safer, do it. Do it. You need it. I support you. You're going to be great.
I love that so much, Lauree. So much gold in what you just said in so many ways. And I think that is how I try to think about it as well, because so many of the people the reason I started the podcast in the first place was because so many people were coming to me and saying, am I the only one who feels this way? Am I the only one who says stuff like this to you? And I thought, gosh, if only you knew, right? It is a universally, human experience that we all get scared in these kinds of moments. It's part of our DNA to be afraid of these types of things, but we hide it so well that everyone thinks they're the only ones, right? Like we carry around these, or we wear these brave masks. And so we look around and think, well, everyone else is so confident. Everyone else has figured it out. It must be me. And so being willing to say, I'm scared and I'm doing it anyway, gives everyone else permission to own their own experience and feel like, oh, thank God I'm not the only one, right? And that is just such a powerful part of life, is to recognize that we are all in this together. And every time somebody does something that seems impressive, behind the scenes, they're probably in the bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll meet you in the bathroom and not talk to you.
Yeah.
Hiding in the stall next to you.
And if only we knew that, right? And that's the message I want everyone to take away is like, life is hard. It's scary. Like anytime we step outside of our comfort zones, it's terrifying. But when you think about the story you told us of being diagnosed with a brain tumor, which has got to be like incredibly terrifying, it really does put things into perspective of like what's more important here. And I wish you didn't have to go through that to get to that point. I wish there was a shortcut for all of us to be able to say, like, actually, the things that seem really important right now are not that important. And that's something I try to tell my kids who are 9 and almost 14 right now is like, hey, look, every part of being a kid feels super important and overwhelming. But when you look back on this time, you're going to laugh, or it's going to just be like one small thing in this huge constellation of experiences. And so, we get hung up in the moment, but if we could zoom out, right? I think that is a really important lesson for all of us, is to think like, how important is this right now? And for you, like in your example, I think about how quote unquote easy, right? It would have been to just not apply in the first place, bail out in the middle, not actually go on stage. Like there are so many off ramps along the way that you didn't take. And like, even though it was scary, you probably at the end of it were exhilarated and were like, I'm so proud of myself for doing this. Whereas if you had taken an off ramp, you would have lived with that for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have known what could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I don't know if I would regret it, not doing it, because I don't think I would have known what, I mean, that was the title of my book. 5 years later, I wrote the book, so it was like, because of that. I didn't know that that was possible for me. I didn't know that I could be brave in that way. And there are still lots of things I'm not willing to do. Like people are like, oh, I'm scared to do it anyway. Have you jumped out of an airplane? No, I'm never jumping out of an airplane. I'm still afraid of heights, and I'm okay holding on to that fear. But I'm okay with that one. But I really do. I think there's something. Wasn't it Brene Brown that talks about hope is when we face tough things and someone doesn't solve it for us, they believe in us so that we can figure it out for ourselves. Like that's how kids learn hope. And I think about that for myself, because most of us adults still need to learn about hope as well for ourselves. Very much the what's good enough. It's like, how do we learn hope? How do we know that we're okay no matter what? And I faced something hard and I helped myself through it. Like the speech itself was something that I can actually learn from and apply later in my work life. Again, like, oh, I faced that and I figured out what works for me. And I got an A because people said nice things after, so that feels good too. I know, I'm not gonna lie, that felt good. But yeah, I think that one really helped me in a way that propelled me with how I help my clients.
And, when I think about a lot of the things that we've been talking about throughout this conversation, I find it helpful to just check in with myself periodically and say, what's my motivation for doing this right now? What's my motivation for, making this decision or not making this decision? And I feel like that's a really good kind of gut check, because there are going to be times when fear is the overriding force, right? Like maybe I will, like you, never jump out of a plane, and that is totally fine with me, right? Like I'm perfectly comfortable saying that, no, that's too scary and I'm not crossing that line. But there are going to be other times when I'm going to say to myself, like, no, that's not enough of a reason not to do this, right? And if we're not sort of consciously tuning into what's driving our behavior, we can't make intentional choices about when. And it's something as simple as, I think about like in a meeting, do I ask this question or do I sit here silently? And if you ask yourself, like, what would be my motivation for not asking the question? Is fear enough for you? Is that enough of a reason right now? And in some cases it will be, because maybe you don't have enough psychological safety, or in other cases, maybe you just say like, you know what, actually, no, right now I sense the fear, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I like prep as much as possible for my anxious self. And so I have made lists before every possible meeting, including every doctor's meeting, of what are potential questions I might ask in this situation. Because when I'm in a meeting, any kind, like I said, including a doctor, and someone goes, do you have any questions? I'm like, my brain just shuts off. It's like, you are looking at me, you're asking me, I don't know. But if I've written it down beforehand, at least I have that, even if it's like some bullet points of like, what are the things that are important to me about this meeting or event that I'm attending? Okay, has that been answered today? No? Okay. I can raise my hand about that because I already defined in advance. I already agreed with myself going in because I don't know always in the moment. Sometimes fear takes over in the moment and I can't decide as much. But like if I prepped myself in advance with like, these are the things that if I don't come out of this meeting with this answer, this meeting hasn't been worthwhile to me, right? I'm going to have to follow up and that's going to annoy me. And that actually is high on my list of not doing, don't annoy yourself by having to do this meeting a second time. And so that the prep is also helpful in me being braver in each moment and knowing that the prep helps me feel brave, helps me to do it more often.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'll go and be like, yeah, I'll be fine. Like, I don't have time to, make myself note or whatever. And then I find myself in situations and I'm like, oh no, gosh, I wish I thought about this in advance. Cause like, I don't have the words with me right now to be able to articulate it. And then I get really nervous. But anyway, so if prep helps for people, I would highly recommend it. Something we used to do. So when I worked in corporate, I was working in public relations and communications. And one of the things that we used to say is that when preparing for an interview, even with like the New York Times or something, you can you can guess like 85% of the questions that you're going to get in an interview. You can guess that many, like based on who they are or what you're talking about or whatever. Like you can plan for 80 to 85% of what's going to happen. Yeah, there's going to be surprises, but if you've prepared that much, if you've kind of thought that much about it, you're good because then you're on stable ground going in.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a great point. And I love the idea of preparation too, because I often think, when you're in in the spotlight, so to speak, right? Whether that's in a meeting or on a stage, you can't be trusted to strategize. Your fight or flight response kicks in and you cannot think clearly. So to have that neutral moment when you're prepping and you know that you're a good student and you trust it, you can trust that you did the appropriate level of preparation to get into this meeting, rely on that, right? I think that's such a great way to think about it.
The other thing I want to add to the prep is having and this is, oh my gosh, a coach or a therapist told me this years ago, have like a one-liner or like a phrase that you say to give yourself time. So it might be, oh, give me a minute on that. Good question. Let me think about that, or something. If prep that too, and always use the same one. So again, it's already developed in your brain. You don't have to come up with that little phrase or sentence like in the moment, you have it. And so you always know, no matter what, you can buy yourself time.
Yes.
Because yeah, you've done some prep, but how do you buy yourself time in the moment? You got to figure that out before you get in the moment, because otherwise you're just going to be freaking out.
Yes, yes.
And it's okay. It's totally okay. You're freaking out. That's why you're helping yourself in advance with like, good question. Oh yeah, I want to think about that for a minute.
I would add to that, I always say keep a drink with you at all times. Bring a drink with you to every meeting, not alcoholic. Sometimes people think I mean, like,
like sipping your martini, you don't think of answers right away.
bring water with you to every meeting, because just like having that question or that response, you also have a pause button that just taking a sip buys you time to collect your thoughts and get your nervous system under control. Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Lauree, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I would love to continue it all day. But I would love to ask you too, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I have really enjoyed this too, Kim. I love how introverts tend to just jump right into conversations immediately and like no small talk. We're not going to chat. We're going to like go right in. And I really respect that. My website is simply Leap, which is the name of my business, because I help folks leap. And my books are there on my website, and My overthinking quiz is also available there to find out what type of overthinker you are and how to turn it into a strength as opposed to a liability. And I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Well, all of those links will be in the show notes for anybody who is interested. And thank you again, Lauree, for having this conversation with me.
Oh, thanks, Kim.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.